Hello, everyone. You are very welcome to our Hire Wednesday webinar. We will start shortly, but just to give a little bit of an overview for anyone who might be new to us and new to myself, my name is Kelly McGrath-Smith. I am the Community Director over at Hire. We are a global TA HR community. We've got over 11,000 members globally at the moment and growing, which is absolutely amazing. If you haven't heard of us before and you fancy checking us out, I've just popped a little link below for you to head to. So it's hirehq.com if you fancy joining the community. So we bring you weekly webinars as part of our mission to kind of up level and upskill the industry. We kind of like to see ourselves as the hive mind of TA. So inside of the community, we have various Slack groups. We've got chats that you can kind of join in to discuss specialist subjects, depending on what your interests are. We kind of appreciate that working sometimes within HR and TA can be a little bit of a lonely role. There's a lot of us who are in standalone roles or maybe building up a team for the first time, and actually having a group of peers to be able to interact and engage with can be really, really lovely and supportive. And we also have in-person and virtual events as well for people in the community. But for our LinkedIn webinars, this is open for everyone to join and be part of the conversation. So very excitingly today, we've got an absolutely fantastic panel joining us, and we're really looking at hypergrowth for this webinar. And this is something that was requested quite a lot from members in the community. We have a lot of folk who do work for startups and scale-ups, and this topic will hopefully be of interest to a lot of people who are tuned in. We will have a Q&A at the end if you do have any questions as we kind of work through our conversation. But please feel free, like as we go through the conversation, if there's any comments you have, any questions, you can absolutely pop them in the chat as well. We want to make this as useful to you that are joining live, so do feel free to join in on the conversation too. But for now, what I will do is I'll hand over to our lovely panelists to give a bit of an intro to themselves so that you can find out a little bit more about them. So I'll go around my screen as it's set up. So Tim, I'll go to you first if you'd like to give yourself a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah, hey, Tim Cashman. I'm over at Captivate IQ, overseeing growth through EMEA. Prior to this, I was with WeWork in London and New York, and a lot of people know that growth story. And previous to that, I was in Los Angeles helping BuzzFeed grow their video production space. And yeah, happy to be here. Thanks a lot, Kelly.
Amazing. And Vaso, I'll go to yourself next.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Great to be here and great to be sharing the panel with Tim and James. I'm Vaso. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Ravio. For those of you who don't know us, Ravio exists, as I always say, to take the pain out of compensation. It's incredibly hard to build a comp model that's filled with old data and terrible spreadsheets, and there's a huge risk of that, and we help solve that risk by providing real-time market data to fast-growing companies like the ones we're about to talk about. Previous to this role, I was at a great company called TrueLayer, where I helped scale the business from 40 people to 440. And before that, I was lucky enough to be the first people hire at Deliveroo back in 2015. So saw the sort of wild growth over there as well. But yeah, looking forward to the panel.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, James.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm currently the VP of Talent at Mews. I've just had my second year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. My role here has been fairly broad at times because sort of the people team's been maturing. It's covered a bit of reward and D&I and onboarding, but primarily my focus is on the talent acquisition side. When I joined a couple of years ago, we were about 250 people. I think we'll end up this year just under 1,000. So it's been sort of fairly rapid growth. Prior to this, I worked at ClearScore, so I had sort of 3 years working in a VC group, and that culminated being pretty early on at ClearScore, leading their people function, and left after about 18 months when we'd gone from sort of 20 people up to about 150 in 3 countries. And then prior to Mews, I was at a company called Hudl. So they're a global leader in sports analytics. They're based in sort of the Midwest, so not the typical kind of US startup. I joined when we were about 400 people in 3 countries, and after about 4 years, we're about 2,000 people in 20 countries. So interesting growth from like a geographical and a headcount point of view there.
Yeah, amazing. Well, obviously some fantastic companies, well-known names that we know, and I think there's a lot that we'll recognize from that scaling perspective as well. But it might be nice maybe to just kind of go around and just kind of tune in a little bit more deeply to, you know, those companies where actually you did have that kind of hyper growth and scale, just to give maybe a little bit more of an overview for people tuning in as well. So Tim, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so at WeWork, I was, I don't know, employee 2,000, somewhere in there. Not early, but early enough. And then we scaled about 18,000 people. And I oversaw a big portion of like the product design and engineering portion of that growth. And what was interesting is that there obviously was already a TA function, you know, focused in there, building out WeWork. And then there was a whole WeWork new engineering recruitment team that was brought on. And there was very different processes, very different culture. It felt like a completely different company. So that was interesting growth. And we were growing in Israel, we were growing in London, we were growing all over the US. And then more recently at Captivate IQ, it's a San Francisco-based company, fully remote in the US, and then started to hire and looking to grow in Europe. So through the hypergrowth, a lot of lessons learned on what can and can't do, especially when you go into new countries. So I was brought on board to start to rein that in and be more specific and bring some purpose into why and where. And so that's been the primary focus of what I've been doing, and also kind of that interesting growth model. At BuzzFeed in Los Angeles, it was my first introduction to what hyper growth ever meant. And I was young and made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot really quickly. So yeah, hopefully I can share some of that through this.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that's the thing, when you work in hyper growth and scaling environments, there's mistakes and learnings. And I think that's so interesting to hear as well, because loads of people are in similar positions where it is a little bit of trial and error as well. And Vaso, on to you. Oh, you're on mute there.
Sorry, there's a dog who's really excited, and so yeah, I'm muted, but you might hear him. He's super.
Dogs always make webinars better, so it's all good.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, got introduced to hypergrowth through that phenomenal journey at Deliveroo. So just to give a sense of scale, when I joined in March 2015, I think I joined as sort of the employee number 19 or so, something like that. Fast forward to the end of that year, and we were already at a head count of north of 600, trading across 100 cities, 12 countries, 3 continents, versus when I had started, which was we were trading in Chelsea and Shoreditch, if I remember correctly. So it was wild, and I made all the mistakes in the world. Happy to talk about them in depth. I sort of recorded them all in a like physical notebook. I still have it, but used a lot of those learnings to help me when I was hired at TrueLayer to basically do the same journey, of course, in a sort of B2B SaaS model. But it was great not to make those mistakes. Of course, I made others, but overall, like an amazing journey. Both were amazing journeys to have been on, and I'm looking forward to replicating them here at Ravio and elsewhere.
Yeah, I love that as well about keeping a log. It's something that you kind of bring with you and reflect back on.
Yeah.
And how about you, James?
Yeah, I mean, so apologies. I think I did some of my headcount growth into my introduction, which was probably a bit of an error. But I would definitely echo the other people's comments around learning from your mistakes. I think you tend to blunder into things. I feel like if I remember back to my first role at ClearScore, really I was primarily an experienced recruiter and really didn't have much experience leading a function across a business. So through that experience, I then got better at working on getting involved in like the headcount planning process and building up maturity models for TA teams and things like that. And there are things that I've learned from that Hudl experience I'm bringing now into Mews. Hopefully that's making my team a bit of a safer place to work in terms of like stopping and get to burnout, building psychological safety. We've adopted some agile practices and things like that as well. So agree with Tim and Vaso that each of those experiences adds to your next gig and actually hopefully makes it a bit of an easier ride.
Yeah, amazing. And we can kind of dig deeper into all those areas kind of as we go through our conversations as well. But I think a nice place to maybe start is looking at that kind of foundational layer from, both a people team perspective and a TA team perspective. So maybe we can talk around, the essentials that you actually need in order to scale effectively, looking at it from those teams' perspective. Vaso, I'll go to you first, maybe just to kind of lead on that kind of people side of things initially, and then we can talk around kind of people and TA with both James and Tim as well.
Yeah, super. So yeah, I think one of the big mistakes that I've made, prior to a scale journey, is making sure that you have the tech stack that you need to ensure that all sort of manual tasks, all sort of hacky methods of of hiring, onboarding, retention, engagement, performance, compensation. Make sure that you have the tools that will enable you to roll out all the cool initiatives that your team is providing at scale, and without requiring you constantly to come down into the weeds, right? And there are so many easy wins. I mean, for one, the HR tech stack has completely changed to what it was a million years ago. Like, there are so many cool tools, so many helpful communities that we can all lean on and use. And I'm constantly blown away with how helpful people are actually in the people space. So, look into what tooling you need. Once you've decided which ones are the really important ones, and of course I value comp very highly on that, and I talk about it later. Make sure you set up the integrations correctly so that the systems are talking to each other, so they're talking to the HRIS, they're talking to the procurement, finance system, whatever it is. It is worth the technical team's time to set this all up for you in a nice sprint, and then you're good to go, and let's go out and hire and onboard 30, 40, 50 people a month. You cannot do it without a tech stack that works. It's just, I've been there. It's so painful. It breaks. Your life will be difficult. Don't do it. Get the tooling that you need.
And on top of that, Vaso, like making sure that the team know how to use the tool and actually use it and use it properly, because otherwise, from the coordinator to the VPs, it can easily get messy, and then becomes pointless and useless. So yes, the tech stack is crucial, but then knowing how and when to use it is probably just as important.
Completely agree. And I think, related is also, speaking about teams, typically I find that people will always, work in partnership, obviously, with the talent team, and go out and hire a bunch of amazing folks for all the other teams. Please don't make the mistake that I made. Prioritize hiring your own team first, and then you can help hire all the other folks, because we cannot keep supporting and coaching, mentoring, partnering with other teams in our organization if we don't have enough people, right? It needs to be proportional. Same with finance, same with legal, same with any support or back office function. Hire out the people team, hire out the TA team. Make sure you get people to join the ride with you, and that they know how to use the tooling.
Amazing. And James, how about you? Is there anything I know you kind of straddle both TA and people as well, so maybe you can kind of shed a light on both as well.
Yeah, I don't think any of my people experience was particularly exemplary, so maybe the recruiting examples are a bit better. I mean, I think something that I've always found as fairly critical foundationally is that you push decision making and autonomy down into your team, so that business partnering layer. I think in a hyper growth mode, it's chaotic. I think it's too much for if you're the recruiting leader or recruiting manager, to have oversight of everything and be involved in all of the backlog refinement and prioritization for all the departments. So I think it's critical that you kind of establish that layer, train them, make them aware of business conditions. So if sales are down, this means that actually you need to de-accelerate hiring for these teams, for example. I think that's really, really important. And obviously investing in scalable processes. You need to trust the outcomes from your hiring processes. You need enabled interviewers, and obviously that kind of leans on to kind of the ATS tools that Vaso and Tim mentioned. And I think one of the other things I think maybe I've learned a bit later on is going beyond the normal remit of a recruiter, because normally in high growth modes, there's a huge amount of planned hiring that you need to make, and actually kind of the hidden surprise in that is the unplanned hiring. If people are dropping out in their first 6 months, then actually that just adds to the stress and to the workload that your team is under. So I think leaning into the onboarding experience, making sure people land well, helping managers level up. So most of the environments I've been in have been sort of a very mature business partnering team at times. So actually normally it falls on the recruiters to sort of encourage managers to build out onboarding plans, making sure they're giving people a great experience. And I think that's critical. Otherwise, that position just comes back into your rec load in 6 months' time.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And we'll kind of build upon that a bit later as well, because it is such a key part, that kind of not only the candidate experience, but then how do you keep people in the organization as you scale? And I guess, Tim, from your side, is there anything else that you would add from, I guess, like a foundational TA layer?
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that the recruiters are close to the people they're supporting. So say they're supporting engineering, go to those engineering offsites, go be part of the team, even if it's a physical office, like have a space where you live there so you can pick up on the anecdotal feedback that people are talking about, or you start noticing that the team's culture is like X, and you can start selling that a bit different or explaining that to candidates a bit differently. And you just become a better partner in that sense. So, when I was supporting different teams at WeWork, I had desks in each pod, I guess, but also with TA. So I was never too far from TA. Obviously, that's my team, that's my heart. But everybody saw me as part of their team as well, and it just made the entire relationship a lot better. So we were able to scale quickly, and then I was able to get the feedback quickly that we're actually slowing down, or we need people with this type of skill set a little bit more, and that was more in real time than having it trickle through.
I love that, and I guess it also kind of leans into that partner element versus seeing TA as this kind of task-taking function as well, when you've got that kind of almost seat at the table with the hiring managers. And of course, you've all worked for a number of scaling and hypergrowth companies at this point. Maybe we can talk around specific common challenges that seem to crop up again and again, and maybe any kind of remedies in terms of learnings from specifics. Vaso, I'll go to you for this one to start us off.
Yeah, so two things that immediately pop to mind. One is, when you're hiring in a hypergrowth environment, it's really important to remember that, this business is going to look completely different in 2 months, in 3 months, in 6 months, right? So it's often the case that you need to hire someone with a different skill set than you think you need right now. You need to hire the person that you're going to need in 6 months' time, because that's going to, by the time they've accepted the offer and worked out their notice period, etc., we're already 3 months down the line, So make sure you hire someone who can stay the ride, or at least, or at least is set up for success when they start. So that's the one thing. And the second thing that I found to be very consistent on the people side is, as a people organization grows and grows and grows, so there's more and more people in the company, that layer of management, so whether we call it middle management or whatever, people are thrown into the manager position often a bit randomly, Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be awesome at their job, but they definitely need the support and mentorship. And, here's what we expect for here's what we expect a manager at Ravio to do, to accomplish, to to model for their teams. Very often we see that that group of folks or that cohort of first managers, second managers, whatever it might be, not having the mentorship around, what does management mean here? And that's never going to work if they don't have the support and the guidance on what is expected of them. So investing in middle management, I think, is really good.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that's such a good point in terms of, often people as well in that environment, they can get promoted quite quickly. Your experience for 6 months in a startup can feel like 2 years somewhere else. And you have, a lot of newer managers. So yeah, I really, really like that point. And James, how about you in terms of those challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why I love high growth environments is I think that's the point when most of the business is focused on TA, and actually you really feel like you're having a huge influence on the outcome of the business. And I think it's critical at that point that you're involved in those planning conversations, and actually that you're not only looking at reflective data in terms of what have been our attrition levels, but trying to influence the business around expected attrition in the coming year. I'll give you an example. In my current environment in Mews, we're doing headcount planning at the moment, and we've been using 2023 data. And actually, I've been pushing the business to say, actually, look, we should forecast that attrition will be higher next year in certain areas. And actually, we're seeing certain teams within our business being internal talent pools for other teams. So actually, we're kind of creating sort of a higher attrition rate and expectations for those teams. So as a challenge, if you're not forecasting and being aware of those conditions you could be operating in, I think that could be a challenge. I think also, if you're not being completely transparent about the capacity of your team to the business, they will keep loading on work, and that will then push you from being that strategic business partner down into that reactive mode, which will really start eroding the quality of your processes, the diversity of the teams that you're building. That will start leading to kind of salaries going awry and things like that as well. So I do think you're really transparent about the cost of overloading the team and pushing into that reactive mode. And I think one of the mistakes I made at Hudl was I was sort of fairly new into kind of a management role, and my team was overloaded. I stepped in and kind of picked up a full rack of positions, and I think long term that was to the detriment of the team, because I wasn't able to kind of protect them, give them some air cover, manage backlogs and things like that as well. So I think resisting that temptation to get on the tools at times, I think is a really important thing.
Amazing, thank you. And then Tim, is there anything that you would add to those points?
No, those are all great points. One thing that, if you're in the early stages of hypergrowth, thinking about the processes that are already there and why are they the way they are, asking why is the offer approval process this way? And if the answer is because that's how we've always done it, it's probably a good time to look and assess if that is the best way and the most efficient as you scale, because you don't want to be down the road and realize that you have 5 people to approve this one offer and it takes, a week and a half to get it out. It's a good time to assess all that. So taking a step back and looking at what that overall from beginning to end process looks like and trying to find efficiencies. Yeah,
that's such a good point, because I think if you look at when the companies are slightly smaller, you often have founder interviews, for example, which can sometimes, take a little bit of time to let go of that from a scalability perspective. But when you're a huge company, there's no way you can roll that out to absolutely every hire. So yeah, I think looking at those processes and see where you can refine, and actually, I think to the point on our earlier question, looking at tech stack where you can automate so that things run a bit more smooth without so many layers of approval. And maybe if we talk a little bit around, that kind of leadership element as well. So I guess, in what ways can this kind of fast-paced, scale-up environment really kind of pose challenges to that leadership perspective? And that can be, you as a leader, or potentially, working with founders, C-suite, kind of as you go through the process as well. Vaso, I'll hand to you.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about this for ages, so just stop me when it gets boring. I think a few things. So, don't forget that it's very lonely being a leader, and it's even lonelier being a founder. It is very stressful. You are often responsible for the livelihoods of everyone, and it's not like you can very easily sort of break down in front of your team and be like, team's like not going well, I'm really worried. You sort of have to represent, right? So all of that to say, it's really hard being a leader, and I have so much sympathy for founders that I've partnered with, but also like leaders. That said, that's why we all do it, and it's important we get it right. I think within hypergrowth, another challenge is that once you start assembling a leadership team, typically most people in the leadership team are quite new, like they've just been hired, or they've only been there a short while. So it takes a while to get the trust, to reach a position of trust within all the folks within the leadership team. And I've certainly found that very challenging. And I think the most simple advice that I have here is to literally spend time together and social time, break bread, go out, have a nice meal, it's important to spend in-person time on the important stuff, not every day, but I don't think there's a way to reach that high level of trust that a high-performing team needs without the in real life interaction. And then I think the other thing that's really, really important is for both founders and frankly any leader of leaders as well, is sometimes you make a mistake, a hiring mistake, and also sometimes it's very difficult to pick up on behaviors that are problematic during a 3-4 hour total interview. Like, it's really hard, right? But when you start seeing worrying things or feeling that there's something behaviorally that isn't working here, I mean, have that conversation early on. Do not put it off. Just get it out there. You will be glad to have had it. But certainly, if the problematic behaviors amongst leadership persist, you've got to make the hard decision. We are judged on the behaviors that we allow to exist within our teams, within our cultures. And so once you have sufficient evidence to suggest that there's a problem here, you've got to stamp it out. Otherwise, it'll infest the waters, and your problem is much bigger.
Yeah, really, really good points. And James, anything that you would add to that?
Not really. I thought that was a great insight. I mean, probably the only thing that I would say in fast-paced environments is most of the leaders are learning at the same time as you're expecting to get answers from them. So if you can kind of feed as much context and information up the channels as you possibly can, that should mean that you get earlier answers. I guess a good example of the headcount planning is typically you need like the sales forecast to come through before you can then build headcount plans. So if you can kind of provide as much information to the sales leader as early as possible in terms of this was your expected ramping time for your team last year, right? Okay, let's build the hiring plans with that in mind and the notice period in those locations. So I think that's really important. And I guess something that I've noticed as well is that as things are done at such a pace, people can kind of seesaw a little bit from one. If they've made a bad hire, they can kind of retreat a little bit into that. So if you do have that situation, let's try and get some time with that leader, do a bit of a retro, understand what the where the ball was dropped in that process or that onboarding. So actually you can kind of learn from that, because otherwise it becomes a kind of a learned behavior and potentially can slow down future hires.
Yeah, really good. And then Tim, is there anything else you'd add?
I think for especially when you're a company maybe 25 that's growing to 2,000, those 25 people were hired, and maybe those 30 people were hired in a completely different company, and making sure leadership understands that cultural change and that shift of this isn't the company that used to be, and then making sure you can retain those people, but also those people might not be trigger happy to hire people that are more experienced than them, and that kind of going back to what Vaso said about hiring for what you need 6 months from now might be, the manager who's hiring might be hiring somebody who's way more qualified in the space that they're living in for it to be under there. So it's a very interesting thing that the leaders have to manage, but also the founders and that C-level need to kind of, I guess, dictate what that culture is and how to maintain it throughout, because it all comes from the top down. It's rare that the culture is driven from the bottom up.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us nicely into one of the other questions around that kind of culture and value piece. Like you kind of said, a 25-person company can look completely different when you're actually scaling. So I guess as we start to scale, how can we almost effectively manage and maintain, the culture and the values that are really important? If you look at a company whose whole value philosophy is around, we say, collaboration and trust, you have that at a 25-person company, and then you're scaling to, over 1,000. So maybe if we look at that piece in terms of, what that can look like. Tim, I might just go back to you for this one, since you were chatting about it, if you don't mind kind of jumping in.
Yeah, I think transparency and communication is really the only way, and I say the only way. It's the only way I've seen it be effective. And trusting the team with information that I've seen other places keep behind a veil of secrecy, and it leaves everybody on the other side of that curtain guessing and then gossiping, and then it becomes a bit toxic. Like a Captivate IQ, it's very transparent. It's wildly transparent. So I know exactly where the company is financially, how well we're doing. There's a lot of interesting things there that, I just bought a house, and, in this vague world of jobs being cut and headcount being cut everywhere, was concerned that, or my wife was concerned, like, hey, are we okay to actually buy a house? And I could actually see the data, and since they're so transparent from the top down, it gave me that confidence in the company, and that drives the culture, which means that I'm very transparent with the candidates and with my team about what's going on, and there isn't guessing and concern. It's a very healthy environment in that sense. So I found transparency and kind of giving trust to your team that they can handle this information is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vasa, would you add anything to that from that kind of culture value piece as you're scaling?
Yeah. Well, for one, I totally agree with Tim's point around transparency. It is so important and so empowering. I love feeling that, that I have a say and that I understand the business. I know what's happening. And I remember earlier in my career, not knowing made me feel, basically disempowered. And it's something that I think is really valued, especially in in the tech world. That said, I do also think that culture very naturally evolves, especially in a hypergrowth environment. And think about it this way: in a hypergrowth environment, everything changes. So why wouldn't culture also change? Now, that doesn't mean that it needs to go from amazing to absolutely terrible and toxic and can't wait to go out, but it will very naturally evolve. And that's okay, as long as you sort of own it and are mindful of it as well. Yeah, and I think it can be very powerful to sort of say, yeah, I know the culture's changed. Here's why I think it's changed, and here's how I think it's changed. But what I think is particularly interesting when we talk about values is, values are only interesting when there's a bit of a tension, right? So what do I mean by that? We all want to, move fast and break things, or I don't know, keep raising the bar, whatever it might be. But what happens when, we're in a situation where actually if we apply one value, the result will be different to applying, one of our other values. So are we more customer centric, or are we, do we pay, I don't know, attention to detail and craft and making sure that the process is perfect? Often those two things can be conflicting. So I think, what's really interesting for companies to answer is, hey, at this stage of our lifetime, when we are in a situation whereby actually our values would bring a conflicting outcome, which of the 2, 3, 4, which one is it that at this stage works best for us? And I generally think that that's like an interesting intellectual exercise for a leadership team to go through.
Amazing. And James, would you add anything to those points?
I mean, I completely agree with Vaso that it's an evolving thing because of the, especially at high pace, because you can shift a culture with a high number of hires, especially in maybe office locations and things like that. I think to add to that, as most of us have probably moved to remote friendly settings, the value of onboarding, in-person interactions, and we're starting to think about going back to sort of some face-to-face interviews for some roles. I think is really, really important. And I think the TA team needs to be aware of what the company wants to feel like and be like in 12 to 18 months time. And you constantly need to be having feedback loops into your TA team of engagement survey data. Like we're currently looking at our like early tenure attrition to say, right, why have these people been voluntary leavers in, say, the first 6 months of their time? What are the patterns here that we can learn to say, actually, these people they didn't feel comfortable here. So what can we learn to kind of bring that into our recruiting practices? So I do think we have responsibility for kind of shaping that culture in the future, and it's on us to actually learn from the things that are going well and badly to make sure that our processes are aligned to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, maybe touching upon your point earlier around kind of that psychological safety and, your own teams, maybe it would be good to actually look at, how you can best manage your team, especially if you look at it from the TA perspective of, growing rec loads, pushing back with hiring managers when, you're scaling and every role is a priority. So how do you as kind of people and TA leaders look at that from, a management perspective of your own team? And maybe you can share some of the best practices or things that have worked or haven't worked with you guys. Tim, I'll go to you first on this one.
It's really understanding the capabilities of your team. Some recruiters might be able to handle 5, some can handle 30, and what each role entails. So understanding the team is, I think, the first and foremost element of it. And I've been part of more teams than have led. So I've always found that when leaders are giving that trust and honestly that I can push back and say, I have too much, I can't handle this amount, and enabling somebody else to take on some of that. So communication is kind of going back to that core element of it, but understanding that the team and who you've hired and what their capabilities are, and also empowering them to say, I can't do it, kind of like what James was saying, where he may have taken on too much in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And then James, from your perspective, from that kind of TA angle as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of the saddest things when a recruiter who has invested so much into a high growth environment burns out, and it's so sad when you see that, because typically it means they need a break and they end up leaving the company. Yeah, that really makes me sad, because that person has contributed so much to the journey. So I was really fortunate. I worked with a lady called Ali Mitchell at Hudl, and she's since joined me at Mews. She's just gone off on maternity leave and had a baby a couple of days ago. So that's really exciting. So I hope she's not listening to this, but if she is, hey Ali. But Ali was a qualified Scrum Master when she joined Hudl, and she started to change my mentality around bringing agile practices into how a TA team should operate, in terms of we've played around with breaking stuff down into kind of users into points for roles to kind of handle the complexity on that point of view. But I think the biggest takeaway is retros, because if you as a team can get into a regular cadence of reflecting anyway, but actually a retro is a really good tool for it, reflecting on what's going badly, what can be improved, I think you get some really good insight in terms of how the team's feeling. These are areas that actually we should focus on from a project point of view to move us forward as a function. But I think the biggest win for that is actually creating that psychological safety, as what you said. If you can kind of build that feedback culture where they are happy to come to you or anyone in the team to say, look, I've got too much, this is not working, how can we improve this? I think that's a huge step forward for a team to make. And I don't think it's just useful in like team practices and stuff like that. We use it a lot at Mews at the moment in terms of working with our stakeholders. So if there's a point of tension, which can be a good thing, you use a retro there to say, right, what's not working? This is TA's perspective. This is your perspective. What are the improvements that we can make here? So I'm a huge advocate of retros to get some positive outcomes.
Amazing. And then Vaso, maybe from a people perspective, is there anything that you would kind of share on this one?
I think I really want to echo the overall point of pushing back. If I think about, frankly, all the people and talent teams that I've been a part of, we were always understaffed and always given the little bits of things that don't fit into any particular team kind of landed on the people team. I mean, the funniest story that I've ever had for this was when I, led an IT team. That was fun. Didn't play to my strengths, but we got there in the end. And also led a very complex real estate project worth several tens of millions of euros. That was also a stretch. And when I reflected back on that experience, it was very much around. I remember telling my manager at the time, "Look, this is going to be one of our biggest line items, that we're going to spend this year, right? And we don't have a real estate expert who is advising me and the team on this. Shouldn't we be worried about that? I am not, I consider myself an overall capable person, but I am definitely not capable of leading, a real estate massive investment that we're going to have to stick with for the next 10, 15 years. But it took me a while to sort of say, hey, hang on a minute. This is, this is something that we should get an expert, whether they're a consultant or someone in-house. We need serious capability here. It's not something that I can do, in the evenings and sort of between recruiting and between people partnering. And I think this is overall emblematic of people and talent teams. And we've just got to get better at saying no, because if you do want me to deliver this, then what are we going to take out? Because we want to be in positions where we're delivering everything that's expected to us of a very high capability at a very high output. And so if more and more stuff gets added on our plate, then we end up delivering fewer things to the level that we know we're capable of.
Absolutely. And I think, a nice kind of topic to look at now is that kind of compensation and benefits element, which can change dramatically if you're a smaller company to actually what that looks like when you scale. And I think a lot of us will have probably been in situations where, we pay too much, then we pay too little, and what that means to that kind of not only the candidate market, but the people in your business. So Vaso, if you don't mind, if I might start with you on this one in terms of maybe you could talk us through your view on kind of that impact of compensation philosophy on a scaling team, and maybe some input in terms of, what might be a good way to approach this and start this, no matter what kind of stage of the journey people might be on.
Yeah, happy to talk about this at length. Look, compensation has caused me so much pain over the years. And it's actually the reason that I joined Ravio, because I was so, and I am so motivated to fix this problem for my peers, for leaders, for finance teams, for everyone in the world, frankly. So I think, having lived firsthand the impact of a company not introducing a transparent, clear, fair, equitable compensation philosophy early on, it has in that company, it was, it had pretty catastrophic impact further down the line. And so my advice now to people is, as early as you can, nail down your comp philosophy. It doesn't need to be complex. In fact, I would say keep it as simple as possible to start, and you can always build on it later, right? But you need to have something clear, and something that you can defend to folks, and you feel able to talk about very transparently, and explain why. And in the worst case scenario where you had a data leak and all salaries became public, you would be fine with that, because your philosophy has been consistent and clear, and where there have been any corrections that you needed to make, you made those early enough. And for any people leaders or finance leaders on the webinar, if you haven't started yet, that's okay. It's not too late. Just start as soon as possible. Ravio and a bunch of other tools do exist to take that pain away. We've automated leveling frameworks. We've automated tech data sets, comp data sets. So now we all can access the data and see, hey, this is what a software engineer level P4 in London should be paid. Here's what a remote UK software engineer should be paid. How does that fit into our overall philosophy? Do we go up, down? By the way, here's our salary bands, et cetera, et cetera. So the tooling now exists to make it a lot easier. What we have to do is just nail down the philosophy that works for your founders, for your industry sector size, and that's a really interesting project to work on, and it's a super impactful one to get right. So don't delay, but if you have delayed, it's okay. Just start as soon as possible.
Yeah, amazing. And then James, I know you're kind of almost dipping in to the reward side of things at the moment, aren't you? So maybe you can kind of start from that straddling perspective of TA earlier too.
Yeah, I was looking after it for about 12 months here at Mews, but luckily we just hired someone awesome to be our director of total reward. So I've thankfully moved that on. But I completely agree with Vaso. This is such an interesting space because of, I think, candidates' expectation around transparency, and then also the upcoming legislation around salary transparency as well. So obviously Ravio, and there are lots of other interesting tools coming onto the market in this space. I think I agree with Vaso's point around keeping it simple, and I think that has to be fed back into TA so that they can try and create as much cohesion and alignment to that philosophy in the offers that they're making. I think if that isn't clearly communicated, then offers can be at different levels, and that becomes a huge thing that you need to unpick in the future. I think one of the things that we've sort of lent into recently was actually recognizing the importance of other positions in our environment versus others, and actually saying that this is a strategically important role. So these are positions that we will go slightly higher in the band. So don't be afraid to do that if it's either a tough role to fill or have a huge impact in your environment. But I mean, it's a really interesting space. I think it's getting so nuanced now, around not only salary and benefits, but also I think kind of the flexibility of your working environment will start coming into this in quite a big way in terms of kind of the total reward that people are looking at now.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot more to it, I think, with some companies returning to office as well. There's different priorities for different folks depending on what they're looking for. Some people would want higher equity, other people higher base. So there's a lot of kind of differences out there. And Tim, is there anything that you would add from that kind of comp and salary perspective?
Having a philosophy that is easy for everybody to understand is crucial too, and kind of what James alluded to is the legislation that's already changed in a lot of the US states. So somebody in London can look at somebody in San Francisco and say, why are they getting paid? Why is that salary band so much different than mine? And being able to articulate why and how that translates. So getting that done early, like Vaso said, and make it easy for people to digest and understand.
Yeah, Absolutely. And there's just one more question for me before we kind of head to our Q&A. So for anyone who is tuning in, and if there's anything that we haven't covered or anything that you would like a little bit more clarity on, please feel free to pop it in the chat now, and we'll try and get to it as well. But from my side, this kind of comes back to a point that you made, James, around that kind of candidate experience, but also that onboarding piece, and looking at, you know, when you start to hire people during scale, you know, brilliant, you've made the hire, but then how do you ensure that they, you know, stay and that they're still happy, you know, 6 months down the line? And, you know, I think one of the things that we had mentioned on a briefing call as well was sometimes that handover between, you know, TA doing their job and then boom, it's handed over to maybe people ops. How do we make it seamless? And then you've got that whole onboarding experience where, you know, it's so important to someone, they've got their probation period. You know, we want to make these people happy. We want to make them stay. So maybe we can kind of chat through that as a kind of holistic viewpoint in terms of what can we be doing, you know, what needs to be set up to have that kind of harmonious approach from kind of TA, people ops, and looking at it from, you know, that 6 month plus perspective of someone that you've hired. James, I'll just start with you on this one, since, you know, just jumping on you because you made this point earlier.
Oh, yeah, I won't do that again. I mean, I think it depends on the stage of business that you're at. I think in environments where they've lent into growing the recruiting team first, and potentially there isn't that business partnering function yet, the manager's first port of call with any feedback on hires that they've made or concerns that they have with their team is always that person that made the hire in the first place, that recruitment business partner. So I think orientating your team's focus to kind of feed that information back into whatever people function you do have, I think is really, really critical. And we've touched on onboarding and how important that is to embed context in the working environment in terms of giving them insight into working practices, culture, stuff like that. I think that's really, really important. And I guess one of the things that I've seen happen at times as a people team grows is that it becomes a bit of a chasm between business partnering and TA. That's obviously a well-known thing that recruiters like to trot out. But I think if you can work on ways to kind of create little pods of teams that can communicate very, very quickly on issues and problems around performance, around people gelling within your environment, so it becomes like a little seamless sub-team. That's something I've seen work really, really well in the past.
Fantastic. And then Vaso, how about you on this point?
Completely agree. I think, you know, having the, I guess it all comes down to acting as, you know, one team and keeping the, knowing what the North Star is, you know, like this is, you know, okay, we know what, we know the mission of the company, but what's the mission of our own, you know, of our own sub team, and really keeping the, making sure that this team is walking in the same direction, and not, just not having those tensions. Tensions within the team. And it's hard because, you know, hypergrowth is really stressful, and it's fun and exciting, but also hard psychologically, you know, physically. Like, you know, we end up working, you know, longer on most days than in previous roles. So it can be hard to do, but very important to feel that, you know, we might be in the trenches, but we're in there together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Tim, is there anything that you would add from that perspective of kind of TA?
Yeah, you know, I've been some places where HR lives in a different bubble and TA lives in a different bubble, but it always works best when I tend to over communicate with them and they over communicate with me, and I take what I need and leave what I don't. But I also don't see talent acquisition's job as ending once they sign or once they start. Mm-hmm. I always check in with people, and even might be a year or two later, like, I was part of the reason why they joined, and or at least in my mind I am, and I like to, you know, continue on that relationship. And that kind of also leads into when you're partnering with that business function and you're going to their offsites, you see them progress, and they come to you often, or they come to me often, saying like HR issues, and I kind of translate that to the HR business partner if they're not that comfortable with that person. So it evolves what TA is and probably what it should be, but I like to stay close with the people that I've hired through their, I guess their employment journey. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes that piece around feedback as well, I think if you are able to stay closer to those people, sometimes you can pick up on something that maybe otherwise you might not have known about. Like, for example, if you are working somewhere, like you said, where, you know, TA and HR are quite separate, you might not know that there's a big lag between, you know, them receiving an onboarding pack, for example. And actually, if you just have that feedback, it's easier to kind of have those conversations with colleagues and, you know, try and remedy things.
It also allows you to be transparent with the candidates during the interview process, so they don't start and it's like, well, Tim sold me something that it's not actually true, but to me it was because that's my perception. So really understanding the team's culture as well is widely important.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, some fantastic points. I feel like we could literally carry on this conversation for another hour and we still wouldn't be done with, you know, the world of hypergrowth and the learnings and the challenges. If anyone does have any questions, like I said, please feel free to pop them in the chat. The joys of watching live is that we will try and answer your questions, but this is also available on a replay as well. So once we wrap up, the recording will be on LinkedIn Live, so you know you can absolutely rewatch or share with kind of any colleagues and peers as well. I definitely think that this is something that we will probably have a part 2 of some point and look at kind of more finer details in terms of the conversations. But it's been absolutely amazing to talk through and kind of hear all of your different experiences, you know, the highs, the lows, the challenges. I think there's definitely things that people can take away with as kind of learnings and things they can try out as well, and hopefully kind of help them on their journey. Before we go, I will just kind of chat you through what we have lined up next week for our next webinar. So we have these webinars every Wednesday, same time, same place. Although next week we're in GMT over here. We are no longer in summertime. The clocks change. But we will have Matthew and Nisha on next week, and we're really looking at talking around scaling and sustainability. So looking at remote work, global hiring, and really unpacking that in a lot more detail as well. So do join us for that if you're available. Like I said, we'll also have replays for all of these webinars. So if the times don't work for you, you can log back in to LinkedIn and watch them afterwards as well. And then for anyone who might be wondering who we are at Hire, I've popped a little scrolling banner below. This way it doesn't cut off anyone's face, because I think, Vaso, when I put it up at the start, you were at the bottom and your face got cut off. So this is my little scrolling banner, which is very like the news. But you can head to hirehq.com if you would like to find out more about us. We are a global community for internal HR and TA folks. So we've got over 11,000 members at the moment. So we love to kind of carry on these conversations in the community, but we also have in-person events. We have roundtables and all of that lovely good stuff as well that you would hope and expect to get from a growing community. So on that note, we are at time. So thank you, Tim, Vaso, James, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. And I will hopefully talk to you all soon at some point in the near future. And thanks for everyone for listening and tuning in. See you, everyone.
Cheers, Gabby. Bye.
Oh, goodbye.